The shuttle shuddered as it pierced the upper atmosphere of Vidian, and Kale decided, purely for professional reasons, that any planet requiring this much dramatic shaking, just to say hello, had already failed its first engineering inspection. Outside the viewport, the sky fractured into bands of turquoise and pale gold, the colors bending unnaturally as the gravity fields below struggled to agree with one another. Somewhere down there, entire cities hovered half-finished above scorched plains, held together by temporary stabilizers and optimism. Cal pressed his forehead lightly against the glass and muttered that he should have stayed on orbital station, where the only thing that broke was the coffee machine. Vidian had been at war for almost a century by Earth standards, though no one could quite agree on how long that was by Vidian time. Temporal drift, local star anomalies, and a calendar system based on stellar migrations made dates mostly decorative. The war was technically over now. That was why Cal was here. Engineers were always invited after the explosion stopped, like doctors arriving once the patient had already lost several vital organs. The shuttle landed on a platform that looked as though it had been assembled by 3 different civilizations who had never spoken to each other. Plates of luminous alloy sat beside matte black struts, and something organic pulsed faintly beneath the surface, as if the building itself was breathing. Kale stepped out, boots magnetizing to the deck as gravity finally settled on a number everyone could live with. He adjusted the strap of his toolkit and reminded himself that he was not here to judge artistic choices. He was here to keep cities from falling out of the sky. He was halfway through cataloging structural stress points when the crowd went quiet. At first, he assumed a reactor had exploded somewhere behind him. That was usually the reason people stopped talking on planets like this. When nothing detonated, Kale turned around and found himself facing Queen Thera. She did not arrive with fanfare. No horns, no announcement, no visible guards, though Kale suspected that was an illusion maintained by technology far subtler than his instruments could detect. She simply stood there, tall and composed, wearing a garment that shifted color with her movement, its surface patterned like flowing equations. At a glance, she could have passed for human, same proportions, same calm symmetry, except for her ears, which extended longer and more elegantly than any human anatomy manual would approve. They tapered slightly, angled back in a way that suggested both attentiveness and restraint. Kyle froze because he had not been told the Queen personally inspected infrastructure briefings. He had been told she ruled. In his experience, rulers avoided engineers unless something had gone catastrophically wrong, or unless they intended to blame someone. "I'm guessing you're not here to hand me a clipboard," he said before his brain could stop his mouth. Several Vidian officials inhaled sharply. Cal considered the possibility that he had just committed a capital offense involving stationery. Queen Thera studied him. Her gaze was steady, analytical, and unsettling in the way of someone who was not merely looking at him, but through him, mapping something invisible. After a moment, her lips curved, not quite into a smile, but into something adjacent to amusement. "No," she said. Her voice was calm, resonant, and carried without amplification. "I am here to observe." "Well," Cal replied, recovering enough to straighten his posture, "I should warn you that observation may involve a lot of complaining about ancient power conduits and why anyone thought routing them through load-bearing structures was a good idea." Her long ears shifted slightly. Kyle could have sworn they did that on purpose. The briefing resumed, though Kale noticed that every explanation now seemed to orbit the Queen's attention. He spoke about gravity anchors that no longer synchronized properly, about atmospheric processors that oscillated between efficiency and existential crisis, about entire districts whose foundations had been designed for a planet that no longer existed in quite the same way. As he talked, he did what he always did when systems overwhelmed him. He broke them down, joked about them, turned disasters into puzzles. It was easier to laugh at a failing stabilizer than to think about the thousands of lives depending on it. Queen Thera did not interrupt. She listened. Occasionally, she tilted her head in a way that suggested calculation rather than confusion. When Kale proposed rerouting energy flows in a pattern that mirrored the planet's original tectonic harmonics, her expression changed, just slightly, enough that Kale noticed. "That configuration," she said slowly, "was last implemented before the war." Kyle blinked. "Really? Huh. Guess the planet remembers what worked. Silence followed. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that pressed in, heavy with meaning Kale could not access. The Queen's gaze sharpened, her posture subtly adjusting as if she were aligning herself with something unseen. After the meeting, Kyle fully expected to be escorted away, questioned, or at least politely asked never to improvise again. Instead, he was told that the Queen wished him to continue his work under observation. Is that like a performance review, he asked, or more of a try not to collapse civilization situation? The aide did not laugh. Queen Thera, watching from across the chamber, did. As Kale walked toward the temporary quarters assigned to him, he tried to shake the feeling that something had shifted. Not in the planet's gravity, but in the direction of his life. He told himself this was paranoia, the natural result of working on a world where physics behaved more like suggestions than rules. He was an engineer. He fixed things. Queens did not personally observe engineers unless something was very wrong. Behind him, Queen Thera stood still, her long ears angled forward, her thoughts racing along ancient pathways newly awakened. For the first time since the war had ended, the endless equations governing her people's survival had produced an answer. And it was making jokes about coffee machines. Kel woke to the soft hum of Vidian's temporary habitation grid, a sound like distant wind moving through metal that had once believed it would never have to bend again. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, which pulsed faintly with bioluminescent patterns meant to regulate circadian rhythms. According to the briefing packet, it was currently morning. According to Kale's body, it was a crime. He swung his legs off the bed and immediately regretted it. The gravity in the room had not fully synchronized yet, and his left foot hit the floor with more enthusiasm than his right. He stumbled, caught himself on a wall that obligingly firmed up under his grip, and muttered that if he survived this assignment, he was filing a complaint against planets with adjustable physics. By the time he reached the central reconstruction hub, Vidian was fully awake. Drones drifted through the air like metallic insects, weaving energy filaments into cracked superstructures. Sections of the city floated overhead, held in place by gravity anchors that flickered as if they were thinking about quitting. Engineers from half a dozen worlds moved through the space, arguing in a mixture of spoken language, light pulses, and one species that communicated primarily through aggressive holograms. Cal activated his wrist console and pulled up the stabilization data from the previous day. The numbers were interesting. That was the polite engineer word for alarming. He frowned, ran the calculations again, then again, just to be sure Vidian hadn't decided to rewrite math overnight. It had not. The system was responding exactly as expected, just not in the way it had been designed to. That's not good, he said aloud, because engineers trusted reality more when it was verbally acknowledged. It rarely is, came a calm voice behind him. Cal jumped, nearly dropping his console. He turned and found Queen Thera standing a respectful distance away, hands folded loosely, expression neutral. No guards, no entourage. Just her, observing like a scientist who had wandered into her own experiment. Do you have some kind of cloaking device? Kyle asked, pressing a hand to his chest. Or do I just have terrible situational awareness? Neither, Thera said. You were concentrating. Well, that's fair. When I concentrate, entire worlds could collapse, and I wouldn't notice until someone filed a complaint. Her long ears shifted slightly. Kale was starting to recognize that movement. It seemed to accompany moments when she found something notable. She gestured toward the data hovering above his console. You are dissatisfied with the gravity anchors. I wouldn't say dissatisfied, Kale replied. More like disappointed in their life choices. He explained the issue as he saw it, pacing as he spoke, sketching shapes in the air with his fingers. The anchors were overcorrecting, reacting too aggressively to fluctuations in planetary mass distribution caused by lingering war damage. The system was fighting the planet instead of listening to it. Whoever had designed it had assumed Vidian would eventually return to what it had been before. That's the problem, Kyle said, stopping abruptly. The planet isn't that anymore. Thera's gaze sharpened. Go on. Kyle hesitated. He was used to speaking to other engineers, people who understood that admitting a system was obsolete did not mean it was a failure. Speaking this way to a ruler felt risky. Still, he continued, most reconstruction plans try to restore what was lost. Same layouts, same patterns, same assumptions. But Viridian's course shifted during the war. Mass redistribution, crustal fractures, energy scars. You can't force it back into its old shape. You have to design for what it is now. Thera was silent for a long moment. Around them, the city hummed, strained, waited. This reasoning, she said finally, was once considered heretical. Kale snorted. Yeah, that tracks. Every time someone calls my work heretical, it usually means I'm about to fix something. She studied him with an intensity that made him acutely aware of his posture, his tone, even the way he stood. It was not judgment, it was analysis. Your solution, she said, resembles one proposed long ago. Cal raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. Brilliant visionary, ignored by everyone, probably died dramatically? Died, Thyra said quietly. Yes. The air between them thickened, the humor faltering under the weight of implication. Cal cleared his throat. Well, he said carefully, I promise I didn't steal anyone's homework. Parallel thinking happens, especially when physics is involved. I am aware, Thera replied. Still, the similarity is precise. She authorized a test implementation on the spot. Kyle watched as ancient protocols yielded to new commands, the gravity anchors adjusting their response curves, easing into cooperation rather than control. Slowly, almost shyly, the suspended district above them stabilized. The flickering lights steadied. The background tension in the city's hum softened. A cheer went up from the engineers. Kale exhaled, unaware he'd been holding his breath. There, he said, smiling despite himself. No falling cities today. Always a win. Thera's expression changed then, not dramatically, but enough that Kale noticed. Something like relief, something like recognition. As the crowd dispersed, she remained. You will continue advising on all major reconstruction decisions, she said. Kyle blinked. Is that a request or an order? An observation, Thyra replied. You already are. He laughed, the sound echoing oddly in the vast chamber. You know, back home, engineers don't usually get this much attention. Mostly we get blamed when doors open the wrong way. Her ears angled forward again. I find that inefficient, she said. As she turned to leave, Cal watched her go, unease creeping in around the edges of his satisfaction. He had come to Vidian to fix broken systems. He had not expected to become one. And somewhere deep within the planet's ancient mechanisms, dormant patterns stirred, responding not to command, but to familiarity. By the third cycle on Vidian, whatever that meant in relation to a day, Kale had developed a working theory that the planet was less a celestial body and more a very large, very traumatized machine. It groaned when systems shifted, hummed nervously when energy loads changed, and occasionally did things that suggested it was holding a grudge. Kale sympathized. He too responded poorly to sudden changes and unresolved trauma. He stood on a suspended transit bridge, watching repair drones stitch fractures in the air like patient surgeons. Beneath the translucent surface, the ground was far enough away to make trusting the gravity anchors a conscious decision rather than a reflex. He had learned not to think about it too much. Thinking led to imagining failure. Imagining failure led to falling. Still standing, he muttered. Good sign. Your optimism is statistically unusual, came a voice beside him. Cal turned, unsurprised this time, and found Queen Thera walking at his pace. She had begun doing that, appearing without announcement, moving alongside him as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her presence no longer made entire rooms freeze, though the engineers still pretended very hard not to stare. Optimism is just pessimism with better timing, Kale said. I assume things will work eventually. If they don't, I complain creatively. Her long ears angled slightly back. Kale had decided this meant curiosity mixed with caution, though he had no proof beyond instinct and a growing confidence in his ability to misinterpret alien body language. They stopped at a console overlooking the core stabilizers. Kale pulled up layered holograms, energy flows, neural reactive architecture, adaptive feedback loops that blurred the line between machine and biology. Vidian technology was built to respond to intention as much as input, which made it elegant, terrifying, and deeply annoying to debug. The stabilizers are adjusting faster than predicted, Kyle said, which would be great if it didn't mean they're learning. Thera's gaze sharpened. They are meant to learn. Sure, Kyle replied, but usually after a few centuries, not 3 days. Either your systems really like me, or something very strange is happening. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was lower, more deliberate. Come with me. That was how Kale found himself inside a chamber that did not appear on any public map. The walls curved inward, etched with patterns that pulsed softly, responding to their presence. The air felt denser here, charged in a way his instruments could not quite quantify. At the center stood a circular interface, dormant but unmistakably powerful. This is a cognitive archive, Thera said. It records patterns. Kale squinted. Patterns of what? Behavior? Thought? Fashion mistakes? Decision-making under pressure, she replied. Problem-solving instincts. Neural symmetry. Kale laughed, then stopped when she did not. Oh, he said, that kind of pattern. She activated the archive. Light blossomed in the air, forming abstract representations of minds, flowing structures of probability and choice. One of them glowed faintly, older than the rest, its shape complex and deeply familiar. Thyra's long ears trembled, just slightly. This, she said, was my mate. Kyle swallowed. Was. He died during the war, she continued, but his patterns remain. They are rare. The archive shifted. Another structure emerged, newly formed, its contours aligning with the first in ways that made Kale's skin prickle. Kyle stared. That's, not good. It is unprecedented, Thera said. Your cognitive approach mirrors his with a probability margin that defies chance. Kyle rubbed his face. Okay, let's slow down. Are you telling me my brain looks like your dead partner's brain? In function, she said calmly, not identity. That's not helping. He paced, running a hand through his hair. I didn't know him. I've never been here before. I just fix things. That's it. If your archive thinks that makes me some kind of cosmic sequel, it needs recalibration. Thera watched him with an expression Kale could not name. Not grief, not hope. Something more controlled, more dangerous. Our species bonds through recognition, she said. Not affection, not desire. Minds that solve problems in harmony create stability. Without such bonds, our continuation fails. Kale stopped pacing. You're talking about reproduction. Yes. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. You're telling me I accidentally matched an alien royal breeding algorithm by being bad at leaving broken systems alone. Thyra considered this. That is an inelegant summary. But not wrong. Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Cal looked again at the glowing patterns, at the eerie overlap between past and present. I don't replace people, he said quietly. I don't want to be compared to someone you lost. Thera inclined her head. Nor do I want a ghost returned. Recognition is not resurrection. He exhaled, some of the tension easing. Good, because I'd be a terrible ghost. Too talkative. Her lips curved just slightly. It was the closest he had seen her come to a smile. You respond to this revelation with humor, she observed. It's either that or panic, Kale said, and panic makes me drop tools. They left the chamber together. Outside, Vidian continued its slow, careful healing, systems adjusting, learning, stabilizing. As Kyle walked back toward the reconstruction hub, he felt the weight of something settling, not destiny, not obligation, but the unsettling awareness that the universe had noticed him, and that it had opinions. Behind him, Queen Thera paused, her long ears angled forward as she watched him go. For the first time since the war, the future did not look like an equation without a solution. It looked like a variable. Kyle spent the next cycle pretending very hard that nothing fundamental about his existence had changed. This involved recalibrating atmospheric processors, arguing with a semi-sentient lift that insisted on stopping at floors that no longer existed, and telling himself repeatedly that matching the cognitive imprint of a dead alien royal consort did not automatically place him on any kind of interstellar marriage shortlist. Engineers survive by compartmentalizing. If he thought about it too much, his brain would attempt to escape through his ears. Unfortunately, Vidian was not interested in being ignored. The request arrived without drama, which somehow made it worse. A simple message appeared on his wrist console, rendered in neutral diplomatic formatting. The Queen requests your presence for a private discussion regarding continuation protocols. No emojis, no warning labels, no suggestion that refusing was even conceptually possible. Kale stared at the message for a full 30 seconds, hoping it would update itself to say, "Just kidding, wrong engineer." It did not. "Okay," he said to the empty corridor. "Private discussion. That's fine. Normal. Happens all the time on Earth. With queens. Definitely." The chamber she received him in was smaller than the archive room, designed for conversation rather than ceremony. The walls adjusted their opacity as he entered, muting the outside world until it felt as though they were suspended in a pocket of quiet. Thera stood near a low table projecting slow-moving star maps, her posture composed, her long ears angled back in what Kale had begun to recognize as deliberation. "You look tense," she observed. "I once disarmed a reactor with a faulty countdown timer," Kyle said. "This is worse." She gestured for him to sit. The seat formed itself beneath him, contouring precisely to his shape in a way that was either thoughtful or deeply invasive. "I will be direct," Thera said. "Evasion serves neither of us." Kale nodded. "Great. Love directness. Big fan. Our species cannot continue without cognitive pairing," she continued. "The data is conclusive. The archive has verified compatibility beyond statistical anomaly." He raised a hand. "Just to clarify, when you say continue, you mean..." "Yes." "Right. Because sometimes continue means, cultural traditions, or infrastructure projects, or..." "Yes," she repeated calmly. Kyle leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "Of course, because why would it be anything else?" There was no anger in her expression, no pressure in her tone. She was not pleading. She was explaining a system, the way he explained failing gravity anchors. That, more than anything, unsettled him. "You are proposing," Kyle said carefully, "that I become your partner. Not because you want me to, but because your species requires a specific mental configuration to produce an heir." "Correct. And this is not romantic." "No. And not symbolic." "No. And not optional." She paused, just briefly. "It is adaptable." Kyle laughed. He couldn't help it. It burst out of him, sharp and incredulous, echoing strangely in the quiet chamber. "I crossed half the galaxy to fix buildings," he said. "Now I'm being evaluated as a biological component." "You see this as demeaning," Thera said. "I see this as wildly outside my job description." She considered that. "Your job description is self-defined." "That's not helping." Silence settled again, but it was different now. Less heavy, more curious. Thera studied him as if recalculating, her gaze moving not over his body, but over his reactions, his resistance, the way humor flared whenever pressure rose. "You are not afraid," she said finally. "I am absolutely afraid," Cal replied. "I'm just afraid in a very sarcastic way." Her lips curved slightly, the almost smile again. "Our last successful pairing ended in loss," she said, her voice quieter now. "I will not repeat the past. Recognition does not demand replication." Cal looked at her, then really looked, not at the crown she sometimes wore, or the authority that followed her like gravity, but at the exhaustion beneath it, at the ruler who had held a species together through war, and now faced extinction through biology. "I don't want to replace anyone," he said. "I don't want to be necessary." Thyra met his gaze without flinching. "Neither do I." That admission shifted something between them. The conversation stopped being about protocol and became something less defined, more human, or whatever the Vidian equivalent was. "If I say no," Kyle asked, "what happens?" "Your people will take you home," she said. Vidian will continue searching for compatibility. We will likely fail. And if I say yes? She did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was steady. Then the ritual will proceed. But it will change. Kyle blinked. Change how? Because you will change it, Thera said simply. You do not accept systems without modification. Despite himself, he smiled. Guilty. They sat there for a long moment. Two beings from different worlds, bound not by fate or romance, but by the shared discomfort of standing at the edge of an irreversible decision. Well, Kyle said, finally standing, I'm not agreeing to anything today. My brain needs time. Possibly a nap. Possibly a very long walk somewhere. Gravity is consistent. That is acceptable, Thera said. I did not expect immediacy. As he turned to leave, she spoke again. Kyle, he paused. You are not just an engineer, she said. You are sufficient. He snorted softly. You really know how to make a proposal sound flattering. Her long ears angled forward. I am still learning, she said. Kyle left the chamber with his thoughts in chaos, and his world quietly, irrevocably altered. Somewhere deep within Vidian's ancient systems, continuation algorithms adjusted their parameters, not locking onto a future, but waiting for an answer that, for the first time in generations, was not predetermined. Kel discovered that once the universe decided you were important, it stopped respecting your need for personal space. His risk console chimed constantly with update requests, advisory pings, and one alarming notification labeled Continuation Subcommittee, Preliminary Inquiry. He deleted that one immediately, then deleted it again just to be sure. He threw himself into work with renewed enthusiasm, which was to say he worked longer hours, slept less, and argued loudly with Vidian systems that insisted on interpreting his frustration as emotional input. Apparently, several core interfaces adjusted performance based on the operator's mental state. Kale had learned this the hard way when a transit lift slowed to a crawl because it had decided he was stressed. I am not stressed, he told it. I am efficiently displeased. The lift responded by playing soothing harmonic tones. He nearly ripped the control panel out. Word spread quickly through the engineering core that Kale now had access. Requests that once took weeks were approved in minutes. Doors opened for him without clearance checks. Ancient subsystems responded to his presence as if recognizing an old password. One technician from the Althary Collective asked him, half joking, if he had secretly become royalty overnight. Absolutely not, Kale said. If I were royalty, I wouldn't be doing my own calibrations. Still, the whispers followed him. Vidian scientists watched him with open curiosity now, no longer bothering to pretend neutrality. He caught fragments of conversation, pattern alignment, adaptive resonance, viability thresholds. None of it sounded like anything he wanted associated with his name. He finally cornered one of the lead researchers, a thin, multi-eyed being who had once compared Vidian cognition to a self-correcting equation. Hypothetically, Kale said, leaning against a console, if someone matched an ancient cognitive profile by accident, how hard would it be to not do that? The researcher blinked all six eyes in what Kale assumed was confusion. You cannot unknow a pattern, it said. Why would you wish to? Personal reasons. The being considered this. You are attempting to engineer yourself. Kyle grimaced. That obvious? Meanwhile, Queen Thera gave him space, which was somehow worse. She did not summon him, did not observe every meeting. When they crossed paths, she acknowledged him with the same composed nod she gave to any respected advisor. The absence of pressure made the choice loom larger, heavier, like a structure waiting for load it had not yet been designed to bear. One cycle, Kel was assigned to inspect an ancient energy spire at the edge of the capital. The structure predated the war, possibly the civilization itself, and had been damaged in ways no one fully understood. Thera joined him there, not as queen, but as observer. The spire hummed softly, its surface etched with symbols that shifted when touched. Cal ran diagnostics while she watched the city below, rebuilt sections glowing against scars that would take generations to fade. This spire, Thera said, once regulated population resonance. Cal paused. Population resonance. Yes, it balanced cognitive distribution, Prevented divergence. He stared at the readings. You mean it made sure people didn't think too differently? Correct. Wow, Kyle said. That explains a lot of your architecture, and possibly your politics. She glanced at him. You disapprove. I strongly prefer societies where thinking differently doesn't cause structural failure. Her ears angled back. So do I. Now. They worked together in silence for a while, Kyle rewriting flows, coaxing dormant systems awake. At one point, he misjudged a feedback loop, and the spire emitted a sharp pulse that sent his tools clattering. Still alive, he said. Another successful day. Thera stepped closer. You fear becoming essential. Kel didn't look at her. I fear being trapped by something I didn't choose. She considered this. Choice is rarely pure. It is shaped by circumstance. Yeah, he said, but it's still mine. He finished the recalibration, and the spire's hum deepened, steadier, less restrictive. Below them, the city lights flickered, then stabilized. That change, Thera said softly, will alter how my people think. Kyle smiled faintly. Careful. You're letting an engineer redesign your culture. Perhaps, she said, but cultures that cannot be redesigned fail. He finally turned to face her. Up close, she looked tired. Not physically. Vidian biology was resilient, but in the way of someone who had carried inevitability for too long. I'm not saying no, Kyle said. I'm saying I need to understand what yes actually means. Her gaze met his. So do I. They stood there, framed by ancient technology in a future that refused to stay abstract. Below them, Vidian breathed, adjusted, learned, and Kale realized something unsettling and oddly comforting at the same time. For the first time since he had arrived, nothing was broken. It was just unfinished. The message from Earth arrived at a moment of inconvenient calm. Kale was elbow-deep in a diagnostic field, coaxing a semi-organic conduit into accepting a new load-balancing routine, when his wrist console pulsed with a priority signal that carried the unmistakable tone of bureaucracy asserting itself across interstellar distance. He sighed, wiped his hands on a cloth that immediately tried to clean him back, and accepted the transmission. The diplomat's face resolved into view, crisp and irritated in that uniquely terrestrial way. Behind her, the neutral gray backdrop of an orbital station suggested safety, consistency, and an aggressive adherence to regulations. Engineer Kale, she said, your assignment window has concluded. Transport is standing by. You are to return to Earth within 3 cycles. Kale glanced at the conduit, which had just stabilized and was now humming contentedly. Of course it is, he murmured. Everything always works right when someone tells you to leave. The diplomat's expression tightened. Your contributions have been noted. However, prolonged involvement in sovereign matters was never part of the plan, Kale finished. I know, believe me. This is not how I imagined career progression. She paused, studying him. There are concerns, she said carefully, about your level of integration. Kyle laughed despite himself. Integration? I still can't get the food synthesizers to stop producing something purple when I ask for soup. The call ended with formalities that felt heavier than they should have. Kale stood there for a long moment, staring at the blank air where Earth had been, feeling the weight of gravity he hadn't noticed until it started pulling him away. He found Queen Thera later that cycle in the upper observatory, where the planet's fractured rings cast slow-moving shadows across the chamber. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, long ears angled forward as she watched a section of the city drift into its corrected orbit. They are calling you home, she said without turning. Yeah, Kyle replied. Apparently, I've exceeded my recommended exposure to existential dilemmas. She faced him then, her expression unreadable. Will you go? He opened his mouth, closed it again. Humor rose instinctively, ready to deflect. Depends. Is Earth still doing that thing where meetings multiply when you're not looking? Her ears shifted. Not amusement this time. Attention. They will not wait long, she said. I figured. They walked together along the curved corridor, their footsteps falling into an easy rhythm. Kel found himself cataloging small things, the way the lighting adjusted to her presence, the faint hum beneath the floor that had become as familiar as breathing. Vidian no longer felt alien in the way it had when he arrived. It felt responsive. They stopped near a transparent wall overlooking a district Kale had helped stabilize. Children, Vidian children, their forms not so different from human ones, moved through the air on low-gravity platforms, laughing as they bounced higher than physics should have allowed. "This world will continue," Kale said quietly, "with or without me." "Yes," Thyra agreed, "but not in the same way." He turned to her. "That's what scares me." She considered him for a long moment. "You believe staying means losing yourself. I believe leaving means pretending this never mattered." Silence stretched between them, not strained, but thoughtful. Somewhere below, a system recalibrated, responding to unseen input. "I did not choose you lightly," Thera said, "but I will not bind you against your will." Kyle smiled faintly. "Good, because I'd probably rewire the ritual out of spite." That finally made her smile. Small, real, and gone almost as soon as it appeared. They moved to the ritual chamber later, not to begin anything, but to examine it. The space was vast, layered with ancient interfaces that responded to neural presence rather than touch. Kyle circled the central platform, reading data streams that scrolled in languages he only half understood. "This thing," he said, "is a masterpiece. Terrifying, but elegant." "It was designed to ensure continuity," Thera said. "And it assumes continuity means repetition," Cal replied. "That's the flaw." He pointed out feedback loops that reinforced existing patterns, suggested adaptive modifiers, optional branches. As he spoke, the system responded, light shifting, pathways opening that had not been accessed in centuries. "You are changing it," Thera said softly. "I change everything I touch," Cal said. "It's kind of my thing." She watched him work, seeing not a replacement for the past, but a divergence from it. The ritual no longer felt like a demand. It felt like a framework waiting to be chosen. When they finally left the chamber, the planet's artificial dawn was beginning, light spilling across rebuilt structures and old scars alike. "My transport leaves soon," Kale said. Thera inclined her head. "Then you must decide." He looked out over Vidian, over systems stabilizing, futures branching. For the first time, the choice did not feel like pressure from outside forces. It felt internal, deliberate. "I'm not done fixing things, Hornorm," he said, her long ears angled forward, catching not just sound, but intention. "Neither am I," she replied. And somewhere between Earth's expectations and Vidian's needs, Kale realized that some systems could not be returned to their original state. They could only be rebuilt with care, with humor, and with the willingness to stay when leaving would be easier. The ritual chamber did not look the way Kale had expected it to look, which was to say, it did not look ominous enough. There were no looming monoliths, no chanting crowds, no sense that reality was about to fold itself into something irreversible. Instead, the space felt almost practical. Vast, yes, ancient, certainly, but designed with the quiet confidence of a system that assumed it would be examined, questioned, and improved. Kyle stood at the edge of the central platform, arms crossed, watching the interfaces adjust to his presence. Streams of light responded to neural input, recalculating pathways that had not been touched since before the war. Somewhere deep within the chamber, continuation algorithms awakened, not locking into place, but waiting. "That's new," Kale muttered. "Usually ancient systems panic when I show up." Queen Thyra stood beside him, her posture composed, her long ears angled forward in focused attention. She wore no crown, no ceremonial regalia. What she wore instead was functional, adaptive fabric threaded with living circuitry, designed to respond rather than command. "They are waiting for confirmation," she said. Kale snorted. "Figures. Everything else on this planet waits until the last possible second." Beyond the chamber walls, Vidian breathed. The rebuilt districts held steady, gravity anchors humming in cooperative equilibrium. The ancient energy spire no longer suppressed divergence. Instead, it redistributed resonance, allowing variation without collapse. Scientists had stopped whispering and started arguing openly again, which Kyle took as an excellent sign. Earth had sent another message. Kyle had not opened it. He suspected it contained words like precedent and policy and please explain, and he had reached his lifetime quota for those. You know, he said, glancing at the glowing lattice above the platform. Back home, marriage involves paperwork and awkward family gatherings. This seems excessive. Thera regarded him calmly. Your people bind through tradition. Mine bind through function. Yeah, Kale said. I noticed. Very efficient. Emotionally terrifying, but efficient. She studied him for a moment. You are not afraid now. Kyle considered that. The truth surprised him. No, he said finally. I'm not. I was afraid of losing myself. Turns out I'm still here. Just upgraded. Her ears shifted, the movement subtle but unmistakably warm. The ritual began not with command, but with consent. The system prompted, not Thera, not Kale, but both. Neural interfaces synchronized gently, mapping cognitive pathways without overriding them. Where the old design would have forced alignment, Kale's modifications allowed divergence, adaptive harmony instead of replication. The chamber filled with light, not blinding, but layered, complex. Kale felt the system engage, not invading, not consuming, but listening. For the first time since he'd arrived on Vidian, he wasn't fixing something broken. He was participating in something unfinished. This part, he said quietly, watching data cascade, used to assume the future had to look like the past. Yes, Thera replied. I changed it, Kale said. Hope that's okay. Her lips curved into a genuine smile. It is. Preferred. The system responded, recalibrating itself around that principle. Continuation no longer meant replacement, it meant evolution. When the light faded, nothing exploded. Kale counted that as a success. Outside, the sky shifted as Vidian's atmospheric regulators completed their final adjustments. The planet settled, not into stillness, but into balance. Engineers cheered, scientists argued, children laughed in low gravity. Life, stubborn and messy, continued. Later, much later, Kale stood on a balcony overlooking the capital. The city no longer looked like a patient in recovery. It looked like a system coming into its own. Earth would adapt, or it wouldn't. Kyle had stopped needing their approval. You stayed, Thera said, joining him. He smiled. Yeah, turns out running away is terrible for long-term stability. She considered him, this engineer who had arrived with tools and jokes and a refusal to accept inevitability. You have altered the trajectory of my people. Kyle shrugged. You gave me access. Rookie mistake. Her laughter, soft, genuine, echoed against the stone and metal. As the stars emerged above them, Kale realized something with quiet clarity. He was no longer just fixing systems. He was part of one, not trapped, not consumed, chosen and choosing in return. For the first time in a very long time, everything made sense. Not because it was simple, but because it worked.